I interviewed Gary Eck on the Arwell podcast as part of our season studying the films of George Miller, and we talked about how he went from doing stand-up comedy and making short films to co-writing and co-directing Happy Feet 2 with George and working with the likes of Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, and Robin Williams. And speaking of Robin, you're going to want to stick around to the end to hear an awesome Robin Williams story.
Now go.
Gary was in a bit of an awkward situation. He'd been invited to a cast and crew screening of the first Happy Feet movie, and he decided to go for a workout right before. And when he finished, he realized he'd forgotten to bring a change of clothes, and he didn't have time to run home and change. He decided he was just going to wait until right before the movie started and then sneak in and sit at the back. But what he hadn't realized was that this is exactly what all of the big names were going to do too. And so as he was sitting there in a tank top and shorts, he looked over to see none other than Mad Max and Happy Feet director George Miller sitting down in the seat right next to him. Earlier that year, Gary had written and directed a short film
called Final Call, which was a film about someone being stuck at an airport toilet with no toilet paper, and they're calling the flight, and he's got to make this flight because he's got to get to Hong Kong and deliver documents, and it's all about him getting toilet paper. I describe it as Die Hard in the toilet.
And the Australian airline
Qantas had bought the film because it was relevant.
And so all passengers on board Qantas flights were able to watch the film. And coincidentally, when George Miller was flying back from LA for the cast and crew screening in Sydney, he
decided to watch my short film. And then he was talking to me going, "Oh, how are you going to hold this film?" And he was just talking about the film because he loves talking about film. I said, "Oh, I was really impressed. It kept me going. It was big laughs and blah, blah, blah." And that's how the conversation started.
And the conversation kept going. And eventually, after speaking for a little while, George turned to Gary and said,
"If we ever do another Happy Feet, would you be interested in getting involved?" And I said, "Yeah, of course, yeah, absolutely." But you hear those kind of comments all the time and you never think they're going to eventuate.
But a few months later, Gary got a call from George, and after a meeting, was brought on as co-writer of Happy Feet 2. And before he knew it, he was in a
big workshop for a week. The Warner Brothers people came out, other people were invited, and everyone was invited to kind of pitch their story ideas, whether it's just ideas or maybe complete stories. And George, I think at the time, in his head, I think he knew what the story was. And what he's actually really good at doing, and part of his skill, is it's like he's panning for gold. Like, he's got the kind of story, but what he's looking for, what are the nuggets that I can take from everyone else's contribution and enhance the story that way. So everyone kind of pitched, and I think I was genuinely the only person in the room. There must have been it would have been at least about 25 people. It's a big room, all from different departments. They weren't necessarily they weren't writers. Some of them were just like the sound person, but everyone could contribute. But I'd actually thought out a whole film. I actually thought, what is the whole film for Happy Feet 2? And having no input from anyone else, I just thought, what's the beginning, middle, and the end? And I kind of pitched that. George did a lot of those, the premise of what I was saying. He goes, yeah, great, I love that. We'll just twist it. For instance, in Happy Feet 2, there's a character called Sven, which is a puffin bird masquerading as a penguin, which was kind of basically, in my story, was a visiting emperor penguin that sort of captures the heart of Mumble's son because he's much more brave. And George took that and went, "You know what, I love that, but we'll turn it into a puffin." It was kind of random like that. And everyone went, "What? Where'd that come from?" Because I think, he'd seen the puffin and went, "Oh, okay, that'll work. Why don't we just twist it?" The story sort of evolved like that. And then we sort of wrote this treatment of the story.
Once they had the story outlined, Gary and the other co-writers worked on the script for a year. They'd regularly meet with George,
and then we would go through the scenes that we'd written. And it was always start at page 1 again. Like, it was always start at the beginning and go through it, That was George's process. And and you could tell he would be thinking things the night before, and he'd come in and go, I think this is what happens. And there are lots of moments, you're just going off on wild tangents that don't end up in the film, but it's part of that sort of exploration. So that was kind of the writing process.
Sometime over the course of that year, Gary was asked if he could co-direct the film as well. And before he knew it, he was in a recording studio in Los Angeles. And
Matt Damon walks in, and you're just saying, okay, that's Matt Damon. And he's talking, and then Brad Pitt walks in, and he's wearing this kind of Rastafarian type beanie, and he goes, Matt Damon doesn't know he's there, and he walks up. There's that thing, a very high school child thing where you push the back behind someone's knee and then they fall down. he sneaks out to them and does that, and Matt Damon goes, "What the?" And then he turns around and goes, "Hey, Brad," that's kind of the introduction. And that was totally surreal.
But Gary's time in LA was short-lived because the rest of the cast, Robin Williams, Elijah Wood, Hank Azaria, they all came to Sydney to record their lines. And George Miller wanted to foster an environment of collaboration and improvisation. So instead of being in a recording booth by yourself,
there would be any other actors. So it would be an open room, which I'd never experienced before. And they kind of all had their own sort of little booth type of thing, but they could see each other. George very much wanted all the actors to be able to see each other.
What's the point in spending a year writing a script if you're just going to have the actors improvise? Well, an actor
can really only ad-lib off material that's really well written. If it's really well written and it's really good, they can extrapolate off that and make it funny and add little bits that you may not expect. I mean, Robin Williams was someone that would just give you every variation and do heaps of ad-libbing. When Robin's in the studio, he's very, he's doing business. And he'll deliver exactly what you want, and then is there any variations? And he'll just do it, he'll riff with it, he'll go off, and he'll explore it. But he was so professional in that regards. You know, he was just like there, focused, delivering it, giving it 100%. Robin Williams just had so much stuff. And it was all so funny.
And Robin wasn't just funny when the mics were on.
I think what I found really remarkable about Robin was how funny he was off stage. It was really interesting. Like, I almost think he had almost like a comedy Tourette's. When you're talking to him one-on-one, he was very, very softly spoken, very kind of quiet, didn't try to be funny at all. As soon as someone else joined the conversation, it was like, two's an audience and he's away, and he would just be funny and he would just start saying stuff. You go, where is this coming from? How could you be so funny? You know, and he would do that a lot. He would just, you know, there'd be a small room, people were setting up, and he would just be, you know, saying stuff, and everyone's got tears, crying, you know. He knew he had that skill and he could just do it without him even thinking.
And then one day at work,
Jeff Garcia who played one of the Amigos, was flying home next day, and the guys come up and say, hey, Gary, you know, we're going out for drinks. Jeff's going home tomorrow. Do you want to come? I said, you're not going to believe this. I've got a comedy gig tonight at the Sugar Mill. I said, look, why don't you guys come down? Because they were all stand-up comics. And I said, well, do you want to share my spot? Would it be fun? At this moment, Ron Williams is walking past, and they're like, hey, Rob, Gary's doing a stand-up show. Do you want to come tonight? And he's like, oh, yeah, maybe, I don't know. And he just keeps walking. But he turns up.
And the excitement of Robin Williams being in the crowd wore off when Gary realized Robin Williams was in the crowd.
I think, he's here. I'm just shooting myself so much. It was like it was my first night of comedy. That's kind of what it felt like. I'd gone back to the first time I'd ever done stand-up, and you're kind of in the back room, pacing and nervous. And
Gary poked his head out and saw
Rob was sitting up the back. I ended up going on, and it was an awesome crowd. And I was kind of introducing other comics, and Jeff Garcia gets up, you know, he's killing. And then he starts having fun at Elijah Wood, who's sitting in the audience going, you know, there's Elijah Wood, everybody. Elijah Wood, you know, Elijah Wood gets all the chicks. You know, all he does is bang chicks. So I'm going to go at him. And he goes, oh, you know that ring? That ring, that's a cock ring. You know, that's a cock ring. And it's not it's a cock ring, right? It keeps going on. And Elijah yells out, yeah, when it heats up, you can see the markings. And then Robin Williams is right there, starts doing Gollum, going, my precious. He gets up and starts walking through the crowd. And the crowd just stands up, like standing ovation. Because they know he's there. There's only a really small room. And he sort of starts weaving his way through the crowd, doing Gollum, my precious. And he gets up and then does this like a 35-minute show, which, you know, the audience goes bananas for. Because he was really sharp, because he'd just come off like a 70-show tour from the States, so he was pretty sharp. Afterwards, he came up to me and he goes, thanks so much for letting me do that. I'm like, I don't think you have to thank me for that.
And what did Robin think of Gary's stand-up? Well, let's just put it this way.
The next day we were recording again. And he had a kind of new, profound sort of respect for me in a sense. He actually came up to me and he said, I didn't realize you were one of us. Like, meaning, I didn't realize you were a comic. And then he kind of, because it was an open room and there's two co-directors, so we could just say whatever he wanted to. But whenever I would make a suggestion to Robin Williams, he would always go, yes, boss, what is it? He'd call you boss. Like, it was kind of weird. Yes, boss, what is it? Oh, yeah, great, let's do that, you know? So he kind of, I think, started to, in a way, respect you a little bit more, because you went, oh, well, this guy's a comedian. He must know funny. That was obviously a incredible experience in time.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe, and if you liked this video, you can listen to my near 2-hour-long interview with Gary in Season 4 of the Artwell podcast, where I studied the career of George Miller and shared everything that I learned with you. And if you're wondering, To this day, George has never asked Gary why he was wearing exercise gear to a screening of Happy Feet.